And that was the last I saw of the outside world for 5 months. I had been stricken with a neurological illness called Guillain-Barré Syndrome. And I lost the use of my arms, my legs, my colon shut down, and they basically kept a crash cart outside my door.
You've just heard Tom McGovern, emeritus faculty at Arizona State University. Eric and special guest host Jane Halonen had the opportunity to sit down with Tom for this 240th episode of Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff.
Hi, I'm Bridget Hard, a professor of the practice at Duke University. And I'm a member of STP because it is filled with an incredible community of people who really share my passion for teaching. For me, STP is home. It's a sense of family and friends, people who inspire me, people who give me lots of great ideas for all the different challenges that I face as a teacher. And this community is waiting for you. You can join STP at teachpsych.org.
Psych Sessions is proud to partner with Macmillan Learning. At Macmillan Learning Psychology, content matters, and these days, digital content matters more than ever. Macmillan Learning's Achieve elevates interactive teaching and learning with an extraordinary range of online course content in a powerful yet easy-to-use platform. Interactive ebooks, innovative assessments, engaging videos and activities, helpful instructor resources. Achieve brings it all together and makes it easy for you to find what you need and what you want. See for yourself. Go to macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions for an introductory tour today. Macmillan's Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning.
I teach at this Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and every Tuesday we have what we call the Geezers Salon. And at age 77, I am the youngest kid in the room. The guy who hosts us is 95.
Wow.
And since being here in Maine, I had the youngest when I was in Arizona. I had a 13-year-old in one of my classes. And here, I've actually had a 100-year-old in one of my classes. It was on the Gospel of John. He would come with an aide who would sit behind him in the room, and he would kind of do this, in the beginning of class. And, I was ginger about asking, is everything okay? And just kind of let it. And then he would get up. I would take a break after 50 minutes. People would go and do a walkabout, go to the restroom. We'd come back. And 8 weeks in a row, after the break, he would go like this, and he'd say, Tom, I'd like to get your input on, in the first hour of class, Frank said this, and Julie said that, but my reading of the author that we're focusing on is, so how do you put all of that together at 100 years old? He's doing compare and contrast and holding the textbook constant, and then asking me, "Hey, could you, as the new kid on the block, can you come up with an input on that, Dr. McGovern?" So anyway, that's been my experience here in Maine, having taught now 13 years with this Osher Lifelong Learning Institute to keep my brain cells a little active.
Welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I've got a 2-for-1 special, friends. And so if you're a regular listener, you're in for a treat. First off, I have a special guest host, Jane Halonen. Good morning, Jane.
Good morning, Eric.
And our guest today is Tom McGovern, a emeritus faculty member from Arizona State University, and has done many, many things in his career. Good morning, Tom.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you saying yes. And it's not God's hour, but it is relatively early in Maine, as Jane likes to say about God's hour. So, Tom, how are you? Let's just start there. And how are you and what are you doing these days?
Well, I'm good. I'm good. Both my wife and I have been cashing in on our Medicare frequent flyer. We're constantly looking for coupons from AARP for buy one, get one free. So when I have an MRI coming up, we kind of scan the AARP, monthly digest to see if we can come up with some type of $2,500 imaging bill on her tab with AARP so that I can get mine done. And after a while, they have these quotas. Anyway, we're doing good. We're up to date on all of our maladies of being septuagenarians.
Okay, so we're going to use the big fancy words this morning. I'm sorry, Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, that practice I've come to refer to as the organ recital.
That is the organ recital. That's right. You have to, if you are appointed to any faculty position coming from someplace else when you're in Arizona, you have to basically do that. Okay. There is a prohibition against it at faculty meetings, but if you're going out to kind of socialize with your own peer group, basically that is the first 30 minutes to 60 minutes of every different regathering of people to trade dosage levels, specialist updates, prognoses, but every once in a while you have to, like we do in our classes, you have to curtail too lengthy resumes of diagnostic procedures.
The organ recital. I that's got to go in the episode title somewhere. I'm just telling you.
Organ recital. You got it. Well, Jane lives in that other state that is kind of the Garden of Eden for people over 60, 70, ...
God's waiting room.
God's waiting room. That's right. All right. We are besieged now with updates on Medicare, supplementals, but we're also getting, Patty and I, now we've graduated from hearing aid solicitations to final expenses solicitations. So.
Yeah, there is a progression there. Maybe can I get the two of you to talk a little bit about how you met each other, if you can remember that? I oftentimes don't remember when exactly I met someone, and I know you had multiple collaborations. Can we go there?
I think
Sure.
we can. I know exactly when I met Tom. It was my very first APA in Atlanta. I think that was 1986. And the very first talk that I went to was Tom McGovern's talk. And I happened to have the good luck of sitting down next to Sister Maureen Hester, who was at that time the hostess of Division II. And so I had an immediate welcome into STP. But as I listened to Tom, there was this real sense of, oh my gosh, I found my people.
Wow. 1986 was 10 years after my first academic appointment at Virginia Commonwealth, and the same year that I published my first article in Teaching of Psychology. So I had a little bit of, thank goodness Jane got to see me with a little bit of seasoning under my belt, so I was able to be at least articulate and not embarrass, myself and the audience from the podium.
Tom, was that first, you said 1986 was your first TOP?
1976.
76. So would that have been with Daniel or Brewer?
It was Daniel. The man who hired me was a distinguished Southern gentleman born in the front parlor of a Richmond home. And he had an article published in Teaching of Psychology with Daniel about internships and placements as part of the undergraduate psychology major. And he was the individual who took me to dinner on my faculty interview and took me to the Jefferson Hotel. And then my chair was a statistician. And he basically said to me during the interview, he says, Dr. McGovern, I was a little concerned reading your resume. it looks like you had a PhD light to graduate, but your undergraduate degree was with the Jesuits. So I knew you knew how to think. You were going to be able to work with students and really get invested in their lives and we also are hiring people in order to build some new programs here. So it looks like you've got the ingredients.
APA Publishing wants to give you 15% off your order. If you teach classes like counseling, clinical psychopathology, or multicultural psychology, then this is for you. APA Publishing has books that are written by experts that are grounded in evidence and really help teachers. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a book they have right now called Helping Skills. It's in its 6th edition, and it gives students clear, practical frameworks for understanding and learning counseling techniques. It's perfect for hands-on practice and skill development. Here's another one. Cultural Humility helps students build self-awareness and engage meaningfully across diverse identities and experiences. So head to apa.org because they want to give you 15% off your order today using code PS15. That's capital P, capital S, 15. Go check out APA Publishing.
I like you had articles published on your resume coming out of graduate school. So keep up the good work. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. And that was the beginning in 1976. So I published with Teaching of Psychology based upon the man who had been chair of the department and was taking over as being head of undergraduate programs at the time.
Yeah, that's I look back. My first TOP was with Charles Brewer, and I think I maybe had 2 with him. And I've had this conversation with other people. I wish I would have kept at least one of his red marked manuscripts, which he would mail back then because there wasn't email back in those days. Tom, first off, yours probably weren't marked up in red, but do you have any of those in your archives anywhere?
No, I've long since graduated beyond felicity of expression, which was the marginal notes that after the first page, Charles Brewer gave up writing in my margins. So, no, I don't have those early ones. I do have papers that I wrote as a sophomore in college, and some of the courses I'm now teaching with the senior citizens, I've gone back and reread some of those ideas. I was an undergraduate theology major with concentration in philosophy when I was at Fordham University. So I have some of those original papers on Immanuel Kant, on Jesus studies. I was not an undergraduate psychology major. I had 2 courses. I finished my undergraduate degree, and I had the chutzpah in junior year to go and knock on the door of a person who was teaching the history and systems class. It was Ann Sexton and Henrik Misiak, who had the textbook in the field. And I said, I haven't taken a psychology course yet. Your course looks interesting. May I join you? And they said, well, are you a major? And I said, no. And I said, but your course looks interesting. And they said, well, okay, tell us who you've studied with. And then when I kind of shared with them a couple of the Jesuits who I'd studied philosophy with, and they said, okay, it'll be interesting to have a different point of view in our group. And that was the only course I took as an undergraduate psychology major, and was fortunate enough to get into an APA accredited graduate program after that.
That Jesuit training really opened some doors for you, didn't it, in your career?
Oh, yes, yeah. My wife and I just celebrated our 55th wedding anniversary, and were it not for deciding that was my vocation, to be a teacher and to be a married person, I probably would have been a Jesuit.
Okay, very good. Do you remember? I know the 2 of you have had collaborations, but can you recall a couple of them? I have one story that I'm going to save to the very end where I saw the 2 of you collaborate, but book chapters. You were program reviewers. Did you give like talks together, symposia, write some book chapters together?
Go ahead, Jen. Do we say F, all of the above plus more?
Oh my.
I think probably the biggest connection we had was when we were part of the planning entity that developed the St. Mary's Conference on Quality Education. And Tom, I don't remember if you were on the Committee of Undergraduate Education or if you just got appointed to that committee.
I was chair. I was chair of that committee, and then we had somebody rotate off, and we were so fortunate because you became the person that joined us with Doug Bernstein and a couple of other folks on that, and that became the committee, the APA's governance committee for the Education and Training Board. That was the committee that came up with the idea. Isn't it about time that we have an undergraduate conference? And that's out of that CUE came the steering committee. We added 5 more people, and I guess we had a kind of a motley crew of 10 of us that put that St. Mary's Conference together in the year 1990.
Yeah, and that was my first outing as an APA task person, and so I probably was the youngest person in the room, and I remember just being overwhelmed by sitting at the dinner table with Bill McKeechee to my right and Doug Bernstein across the table and Ludi Benjamin holding court at the end of the table. I mean, it was just pretty overwhelming. I also recall that for some reason, Tom appointed me to the selection group. So to go through all of the applicants to pick the people that would be coming to the committee. And the selection group consisted of Ben and Barbara Nodine and me. And then Tom oversaw our discussion of that. And for whatever reason, I got the worst selection of the alphabet. I got the middle of the alphabet that contained someone who was notoriously lazy, someone who was an ex-APA president, and things that really required a very tough call. And so Tom was really supportive when I made the ethically appropriate judgments. I think he high-fived me on a couple of really hard discussions. I was really grateful to get that breaking in with such seasoned and smart people.
Yeah, we had a couple of people that Jane had to navigate their resumes that they had been around for so long. They knew every restaurant in D.C. that the Education and Training Board or the Board of Governors would take people to, how much the bottles of wine would cost there. And with that background, they brought to their application because we had everybody submit an application of why you would like to participate in this. And they didn't write it in, but a couple of folks kind of were working on the ethic of primogeniture. Well, after all, I have been there since Genesis, and I should be part of this. I have a divine right to be part of this group.
Hi, folks. Let's talk about intro psych textbooks. They often tell our students what to learn, but they don't tell them how to learn. And that's why Norton has brought in award-winning teachers like Stephen Chu and Ebony Glover to join Sarah Grisson on the title Psychology in Your Life, with a new emphasis on critical thinking through their Impact Learning Science Framework. Impact is an acronym, and it consists of 6 of the most actionable learning science principles that students need to succeed. And for the first time, these strategies aren't just explained, they're interactive. So as your students are learning course content, they're also practicing skills like monitoring, attending, and thinking critically, using the study tips that feel most helpful to them. And the result is that students don't just learn psychology, they use psychology to succeed in school and in life. And Norton is going to give you a $15 thank you gift if you take 15 minutes to tour around the book. Just head to intropsych.wwnorton.com/psych sessions.
And from what we understand, in fact, we had a couple of folks who were senior enough, like Ludi Benjamin, Ben, that he was able to say, "Oh, I was so happy to be able to send a Dear John letter to those individuals. I have served on committees with them." it was great to be able to say no and say, well, go find some other place to impress. Yeah.
It was such a good lesson in ethics for me and in mentoring, because I really felt wobbly about saying, if we're sticking to our guns, we're asking them to talk about something creative that they've done. And if they haven't managed to do something creative in teaching, they don't belong at this conference. And clearly, those awful applicants had not. So I made my case and they supported me. And that turned out to be a highly functional steering committee. And then the conference itself was really significant in terms of what kind of impact it had on developing ideas about curricula.
Yeah, and a book came out of that, right? Because I'm pretty sure, Tom, you edited that book, if I'm remembering, in 1992.
I did. I was I was basically doing the Charles Brewer function, for the book. Every person who led a topic area had a chapter to write, coordinating with their committee. But going back to what Jane was mentioning a moment ago, it's probably one of the proudest moments that I've had as a younger faculty member. I had been out 15 years or so. And again, as Jane said, and part of it is what I was mentioning before, I didn't have a background in psychology. So I had yet to teach intro psych. So most of the topics in any intro book, I was running really hard just to play catch-up football on. But what I was really proud of is it was the first undergraduate conference in psychology that there were people of color included in the group. There were women included in the group. There were community college faculty members included in the group. And it was a multi-ethnic, diverse places, from research universities to small liberal arts colleges to teacher or research-oriented universities. So we really had a cross-section. And the other piece I'm very proud of is that many of the people, it was their first participation in an APA activity. And Jane and I have watched, these are individuals that we started to see then publishing and teaching of psychology. They were people who started assuming leadership positions, who ended up winning, teaching awards and becoming, it really was an introduction. And because of the group dynamic and the spirit that was there, it was just an incredibly beginning point for so many of folks. And for, people like Jane and I, who were a little bit further along in mid-career at that point, it was an opportunity to just kind of share with them kind of where we've been, what we've done, and to be, to really kind of grow the division in so many different ways.
It's a lovely, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jane.
I would highlight that the model that we used is one that's been mimicked since then in the invitational conferences, which is pick really good people, lock them up in a room, and give them a job. And then they will rise to that occasion. And I remember how hard the work was. I was assigned to the assessment group. And I say assigned to because no one wanted to be in that group. And I at that time, I was the only really fond assessment person in the group. And I don't know who came up with the title, but somebody said that the book title, the chapter for our title should be Covering Your Assessment Needs. Get it? Cover your ass? Yeah. And
right.
And I really protested that because it's like, no, we're on the brink of seeing assessment as a tool. We need to do better by what the function is that we're talking about. But even worse was, I think, Wayne Whiten's group. I forget which group he was on. At the end of the conference, they put a big sign on the door of the room they'd been locked into that said "Free at last." So I think people really got into the spirit. They developed close relationships, and as Tom says, they developed partnerships and authoring, and it really turned out to be quite a memorable experience.
Well, and I just want to highlight how cool it was for the both of you to be organizers of this event. And then that you have this legacy now of watching those people do well. I mean, Wayne Whiten turned out pretty good. I mean,
He did.
Yeah. He kind of got his act together there. So Tom, I want to change gears a little bit. Would you mind sharing your chronology? And I want to go all the way back to high school. I have fun with this with people. I want to know, were you a band person? Were you in sports? Were you on the debate team? Were you the president of the math club? Well, tell us about Tom McGovern in high school.
I'll go a little further back.
Please.
My two oldest friends are my golf clubs and my books. And both of those go back to around the 5th grade, which is when I remember I was an only child. And there was a man across the street who had 5 kids. Both he and his wife were teachers. So I would often go over to his house to kind of hang out and kind of adopt some siblings. And I can remember coming home and telling my parents after one of those kind of outings with ping pong tables and all that good stuff as an elementary school person that I had decided I wanted to be a teacher. So my kind of pathway in my head, at least, and I can actually close my eyes and remember that. So that's 5th grade. In the 7th grade, I had a Franciscan who I continued to look back on it, and he had us writing every class. And 40 years later, when Jane had nominated me and wrote in my behalf, and I was fortunate to win a National Teaching Award, I wrote him a note. He had left the Franciscan order, married, gotten a PhD, was 20 years running as the president of Nassau Community College, had won the Thomas Jefferson Award for academic and religious freedom. And I wrote him a note to say thank you for what I had learned about writing and how important it was. 40 years later, he described me and 2 other guys that were in the 7th grade class and one of the essays that each of us had put together. In the 8th grade, I was fortunate to have another Franciscan who said to my parents, he got me involved in forensics, in speech and debate, and writing original speeches and then delivering them in the 8th grade. And over dinner after one of the competitions, he said to my parents, I think Tommy should go to this particular high school as opposed to that particular. That particular high school was everyone in my Catholic 8th grade marched off, and they had their khaki pants and button-down shirts and went off and did the suburban, Catholic school. And he said, Tommy should go back to the city, and he's going to get more people and different types of people there. He's also going to have the opportunity to choose French rather than to have to take Latin in first year. And the reason I'm saying that is that, Tommy, I know that, and he said to my mom and dad, both of you have your high school degrees, but you don't have your college. But Tommy's going to be going to college, and there's going to be more after that. So I think he should take a language early on. This is a man who had us reading Tartuffe, which is Moliere's play about religious hypocrisy, when we were in the 8th grade. So his syllabus in the 8th grade was launching. So I can remember being a teacher, wanting to be a teacher, learning from those two, and then being graced by a whole group of individuals in high school. And come senior year, I had to make a choice. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but my family didn't have the economic resources. So for actually a real lack of understanding, my older cousin had gone to Columbia University on Naval ROTC scholarship. And I said, well, let me see if I can apply for one of those so I can go to Columbia and da-da-da. Well, as it turned out, I turned down that scholarship, not having put together that since I wanted to go on and be a teacher of French in high school, they probably wouldn't support that on a Naval ROTC scholarship.
Hey everyone, Garth here. Thanks for listening to Psych Sessions. If you could go to wherever you listen to our podcast and you would follow that podcast or like it, it really does help us as we are trying to get out to more teachers of psychology. Also, if you haven't checked out our website, please visit psychsessions.org and sign up for our monthly newsletter. We offer free resources and valuable news that you are going to want to know related to the teaching of psychology. Thanks.
And really, that was two paths diverged. And in senior year in high school, while I was dating my wife, I left that relationship behind, went into a religious order for 3 years, and learned a lot about reading, about reflection, about also sharing a lot of different things. We got married when I finished up, and I decided between clinical social work and clinical psychology and counseling psychology. But I really felt that I wanted to work with adults who were making transitions in midlife. And I really wanted to devote my time and energy to undergraduate education. I wasn't captured, and part of that was the counseling psychology bit. Working in the University Counseling Center, I had a specialty in vocational psychology and group dynamics, group psychotherapy, structured training groups. So I really wanted to work with healthy people who were in transition, and that's kind of what started to unfold through graduate school. I finished up graduate school in 3.5 years, including an internship.
Of course you did. 3.5 years. Of course you did.
Well, the reason for that is what my department chair, if you remember what I said a little while ago, he said, you got a PhD light. I tried to figure out a way how to take as few classroom courses as possible and do experiences that would build a resume, get a couple of things published by the time I graduated so that I could go back to work, and also then I could go back to work so that Patty could go back to school. And for the first 10 years of our marriage, we kind of alternated. One of us was in school and the other one was working to pay the bills. And that's how things went back and forth up and through, even through Virginia Commonwealth. So in 1976, I graduated. We had adopted our first daughter. So we basically went from Illinois to Richmond, Virginia. We spent 14 years there, had 2 more children. And then I had gone through, I was a department chair. I worked in the provost's office. I was head of university assessment, head of university innovative undergraduate curriculum projects, and had a couple of offers in 1990 to be chairs of traditional doctoral undergraduate programs, but ended up going off to, I was invited to go to Arizona State University West, which was setting up a brand new campus. They had a library and a classroom building. Everything else was under construction. And they asked me to be Dean of Arts and Sciences of a brand new place. And part of my dowry was they gave me 52 faculty positions to hire in a 3-year period. They said, go out and get a faculty, build a catalog, build a curriculum, get students. And that's what we did. And I've been very, very proud of the fact that we were able to hire almost 50-50 women and men. 30% of our new faculty were people of color, and everything was interdisciplinary. So,
Tom, there's so much to unpack there. So let me go back, because there's just some great nuggets there. First off, is there anybody in your life that still calls you Tommy?
Only the parent. I'm sorry, not parents. Parents have passed away at age 95. The family, the Irish cousins.
Okay.
They still call me Tommy. I was always in classes keep in mind, both in Virginia, we had a very big adult population reentry. And everybody, my first 8 years in Arizona, everybody was coming back to school. And I taught my first 8 years nothing but night classes because that's where primary commuter population was. So I introduced myself as Tom McGovern, and I said, that's okay. If you'd like to call me Dr. McGovern, that's fine. If you'd like to call me Tom, that's fine too. So so the only people who call me Tommy are the Irish cousins.
And you said you did 3 years in a religious order. So was that training to become a monk? Was that a fixed term you knew in 3 years you'd be done? Or when you entered, did you think that was going to be your life?
Oh, that was a vocation. That was a calling. And I entered the order that was my teachers in high school, the Marist brothers, who had Catholic schools all throughout the world, all throughout the United States. And the 3 years was basic training camp. It was 2 years completely removed on an estate in upstate New York, meditation, prayer, reflection, combination of secular courses, but also primarily theological courses. And at the end of 2 years, having made vows, I decided that this long term was not going to be for me. The vocation was still intact. And I wanted to end up, at that point, I had decided I was going to get a PhD in ethics and in theology and teach in a university. So I kind of had made the transition while I was during that time that I wanted to teach in universities and to be able to write, not to teach in high schools, which is where most of the Marist brothers would have their vocations. So I say that I was in a monastery for 3 years because it really was a sealed environment and a very homogeneous environment.
Yeah, and then what a cool experience. I mean, Jane maybe knows other people who've done this. I don't know anybody who got to be a founder of a campus, got to hire 52 faculty members, write the catalog together from scratch. I mean, how often does that happen in someone's career?
Well,
as far as I know, not often.
One of the things, as in graduate school, my major was counseling psychology, and I had a concentration in higher ed administration. So I really tried to learn about the history of American higher education. One of the chapters I'm proudest of is actually done twice with Charles Brewer. Charles was wonderful. Charles would get an invitation from somebody to do a task, and then he would call me up and say, hey, could you co-author this with me? Because you know this stuff, and I got the invitation. And we would work together in kind of fusing ideas. And then obviously we would come up with a wonderfully polished copy, and we were off and running. So we wrote chapters about how does the history of American higher education then enwrap into the beginnings of psychology at the turn of the 20th century, progressive era, then into post-World War II, and then how did we move into more of a disciplinary focus? One of the things that I tried to do, and started actually in Virginia, I used, and Jane has done this so often in her work, you grab a political initiative that is shoved down the faculty's throat, and you figure out how to make lemonade with lemons. So when I was chair of the department in psychology in Virginia, state mandated assessment of student learning outcomes came along. I had a provost who said, hey, you just won the teaching award. You've got credibility. You're in charge of assessment, but figure out how to do it creatively. And in the course of 4 years, I had a project called The Varieties of Undergraduate Experience,
right,
in which across all of the professions and the disciplinary majors, from accounting to pharmacy to modern languages, we ended up crafting a faculty consensus general education for the entire university. And 20 years after I left that university, it was still in place. And it kind of, I've looked at my career as wanting to bring to administrative life, or these tasks that Jane and I have done over so many years, and to bring an understanding of group dynamics and how to get the people that you're able to invite to the table to create the energy. I mean, that's how the concept of psychological literacy came about. I had a wonderful group of people at the Puget Sound undergraduate degree. Diane Halpin put me in charge of one of the groups and said, see if you can come up with some conceptual piece that will help this out. So we got a group of people from Australia, people from hither, thither, and yon in American universities, of editor Randy Smith, who was editor of Teaching is Psychology. So we put all of these very, very interesting but diverse people, and out of that group dynamic, we fashioned the concept of psychological literacy. And so one of the things that I've tried to do is to be very task-oriented, but also to use kind of a group dynamic to fashion something that is really, at Arizona State, it was thinking outside the box, interdisciplinary education. 5 majors was the College of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences. All of them were totally interdisciplinary. Okay. At Virginia Commonwealth, it was common denominators that was could be part and parcel of every liberal arts background brought to a profession or brought to a disciplinary major.
So let me jump in there with 2 things. One is, I agree, you identified one of Jane's superpowers. And one of Jane's superpowers, among many, is the ability to get a group of people who are different from one another to collaborate towards a common goal. I've seen it firsthand a number of times. And this ability to identify talent and then get talent to work together is a skill that I think very few academics have. It's something that every dean should have. It's something every provost should have. So Tom, I changed the words, but I think the sentiment is still the same. The other thing, Tom, I wanted to ask you about is, do you have any Charles Brewer stories? Because some people collect stamps and coins and baseball cards. I kind of collect Charles Brewer stories. And so do you have any good ones about a fun dinner or after hours activities that you can share publicly?
Charles and I drank martinis in some of the nicest hotels around the country. And we did so on the department's nickel that had brought us in to do a academic program review, or if they were far enough along and they weren't being put under an electron microscope for losing something from their dean. But Charles and I would fashion, and as a savvy senior, he and I would, over martinis, figure out, okay, how can we put together feedback for the next chapter that would really pull together a whole bunch of the faculty? And then how can we market that? We considered that the department was one audience that we had for the task, but then the second audience was going to be the dean, in which we were teaching a dean from whether it's biology, chemistry, and the real sciences, or history and art history, which had to be educated about what are some of the ground rules for faculty development within the discipline of psychology. So we were basically saw 2 audiences: how to be advocates for a department if it was in good enough shape that we could say, okay, hey, you're at the senior year level, so we're trying to do capstone input with you, and then grow the department in terms of also the young people and where they were, and be a sounding board for a chair but also for a dean in terms of being advocates for the discipline. Now, that happened. That was Charles Brewer taught me how to do that. And then Jane and I picked up on that in the different places that we went to. And I can remember one place vividly that we were called in, and the department was,
Oh, no.
my former provost was the president of that university. And he actually called and said, "This is Tom, this is an SOS. So I'd like you to come, and if you could, spend some time with this group." There's my reading of it, and he was a group counselor as well. So that's why I worked with him for 4 years at Virginia Commonwealth. He said, there's some real serious, I think there's some personal issues that you may need to address. So my first response was, oh God, who do I know that can be clinical as well as academic? And I got on the phone and I called Dr. Halonen, licensed clinical psychologist. And I said, hey, I think we got a task that I really need your help on. And as I recall, when we got there was a lot of diagnostic opportunities right out of the DSM-3.
Oh, goodness.
Including one story I have, remember, and please edit me if I'm wrong, Dr. Halonen. An individual had been hurled down a flight of stairs.
I don't recall that.
On a
Although
weekend.
I recall lots of other things. Yeah, I don't.
And maybe I'm getting the school wrong. Maybe you're.
Well, I was trying to leave the actual school off.
Yeah.
Unspoken.
So Tom, it wasn't Charles Rook that you talked to, who was a university president, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the story you were just telling?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So first off, I don't remember the stairwell piece, but I might not have been privy to all the data. And so I've outed this story, and I was going to come back to it anyway. So I met Jane in 1989 at MPA. She was running a CTUP session, Council for the Teachers of Undergraduate Psychology. I met Tom McGovern in 1993 when he and Jane came out to Boise State University to do a program review. So I remember precisely when I met the two of you, and we probably shouldn't go into the details of that 1993.
No, we should not. We should probably not.
That 1993 program review. And Jane, I don't know if you'll do this, but Jane has given me a quote over the past 30 years of what she said about that program review. And Jane, I'm going to share it, but I'd love to hear it in your words, your voice.
No, go ahead and say it, because I don't know what I said.
What
Jane, did I say?
Jane said, and this is probably 20 years after that review, 25 years after, and I'm asking her, and we're reminiscing about her visit to Boise State, and she says to me, "It was the second worst department of psychological science I've ever visited." So we couldn't make number one, but at least we made number two.
Well, and I do have in my list of, in my treasured artifacts of professional development, I do have the formal release that you signed that said I could talk about it, because I think if I remember right, we were asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement as part of our visit there. And
oh my.
Well, no, Tom, you and I signed it. I mean, it was us. We had to sign that we wouldn't talk about the details of the visit. And so I might have discussed the visit to Boise without saying it was Boise. I might have talked about some specifics that we encountered, because personal issues is a significantly underdeveloped way to talk about what had happened. You know, sometimes departments they get into a toxic mire and they cannot get out of it without getting some outside help. And sometimes the outside help is just, what are you doing? And what is reinforcing for you about keeping this stew cooking? Don't you want to live differently than this? And I think ultimately, because a counselor and a clinician double teamed. I think that I hope that was helpful ultimately.
It was, and for the record, we were messed up. I mean, I won't go into the details. I had only been there a year, and I think with a straight face, I can say, believe it or not, I wasn't the major cause of anything. I was a newbie.
And we can attest to that. We can attest to that.
Thank you.
Without violating anything.
That part I do remember.
Yeah. I mean, I caused trouble later, but not in 1993. To be fair. Tom, I want to be respectful of time. And
wait, I have a question.
Oh, please.
If you don't mind.
No, of course
I think one of the most amazing things about Tom is his resilience of spirit. And Tom, I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about the curve that you were thrown in health that was potentially pretty derailing a few years ago?
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Okay, that was a curve, so he needs a little time to compose.
No. I was prepared to talk about it. In 1996, I think I have the dates right. I was fortunate on the third time around to run for president of the division. And I was elected. I was dealing with a blood issue at the time, which caused me basically my blood. I wasn't processing iron from my blood. So I ended up having to basically do what's called therapeutic phlebotomies, which left me pretty weak. And anyway, so I did 1 year as president of STP. And then in kind of an irrational moment, I said yes on the campus at ASU that a number of former presidents of the faculty senate had been junior faculty. And I didn't think that was right. You know, they were eager to get involved and they thought this would be good. So I said, wait a minute, this is something that senior faculty should do. And I ended up saying yes to be president of the faculty senate at ASU West. And it was the same year that the Board of Regents decided, let's put the elimination of tenure in academic appointments on the table, and let's debate that. Let's consider that all of our universities will no longer have tenure. So the other presidents of other faculty senates had gotten together and they decided, let's elect McGovern the head of our president's council so that he can sit at the table with the Board of Regents and represent the faculty. So basically, I was in the middle of the presidency of STP, having gotten into what usually is a ceremonial task. Once a month, you go to a Board of Regents meeting and you sing the praises of this person nominated for a Nobel and da-da-da. And I ended up being on a plane and having to go back and forth to Washington, D.C. to find out what some of the councils of higher education, some legal perspectives, and turned into kind of the head of a union, if you will, negotiating with the Board of Regents that, no, you may be trying what their basic agenda was. Let's get more of these faculty who are putting do not disturb signs on their office doors, not seeing undergraduates and just writing their articles and not serving our constituency, which is tuition paying undergraduate and their parents. So I ended up brokering that. And in the middle of it, I resigned. I called a couple of different people, Ginny Matthew being one of them, and ended up resigning the position with teaching of psychology, did the promotion and tenure stuff, finished that up, passed the torch, went off to Washington, an NSF Foundation workshop on multicultural teaching with an undergraduate psych curriculum. And on the way back from that conference, in fact, in the middle of it, doing a 2-day workshop, I began to lose feeling in my legs, and I needed a wheelchair. I got on the plane in Washington, D.C., needed a wheelchair in Dallas, got to D.C., got picked up in a wheelchair. Patty, my wife, met me at the airport, brought me to the emergency room, and that was the last I saw of the outside world for 5 months. I had been stricken with a neurological illness called Guillain-Barré Syndrome, and I lost the use of my arms, my legs, my colon shut down, and they basically kept a crash cart outside my door. I did 2 stints in ICU and then in a rehab hospital. And basically, I was told I'd never be out of a wheelchair again. So spent a good amount of time. And to this day, I have kind of residual nerve damage in my feet and my legs. At one point on campus, I had a buggy that I would drive because I would get to more of a far-flung classroom space. So long and the short of it is, Jane is being very complimentary about resilience, but it's been on pain medication since 1997 just to kind of live with a chronic neuropathy and kind of getting a central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and a central nervous system beaten up along the way. And that motivated me in the year 2000 to leave behind any administrative activities of being a chair, being a dean, wanting to be a university president at some point along the way, and say, no, I want to teach. I want to fall back in love with got me into the business to begin with, and to write, to teach, and to work with students.
But I think you and your daughter also did a chronicle of your illness. I remember reading that and being quite moved about how open you were with the struggle.
Yeah. I was teaching courses as part of our interdisciplinary program in integrative studies. I had a course that I taught in multicultural autobiographies. And I wrote a book eventually in 2007 called Memories, Stories. So I had kind of become knowledgeable about the literary studies analysis of memoirs, and then also about the psychology of cognitive memories and how people remember and then reconstruct so they can write a memoir about their life narrative. And while I was paralyzed, I figured out a way. I had 2 women who were in the class with me who had their bachelor's degree in court stenography. And they were they had moved out of junior college. They moved into our upper division course to get their bachelor's. And basically what I did was the nurses would come in, put a microphone on my tray, my food tray, and I dictated every night. I would dictate a journal. Typically, I would fall off in the middle of pain meds and I would fall off to sleep, so there'd be big gaps in it. But these 2 women actually took those tapes and then came up with a transcript. Our daughter, who was a photojournalist in her major, took photographs of me. My oldest daughter got in the face of the neurologist who was talking about a lifetime in a wheelchair. And my middle daughter, who was a photojournalist, her way of dealing with it, Daddy was really sick, was to take very, very revealing and vulnerable pictures, photographs. Well, she turned it into a senior project for her major. We got it published in the Washington Post Science Time, their health section. It became a memoir called Hard Time, in which she was able to get 6 quarter to half-page black and whites. Not bad for a resume coming out of an undergraduate program in photojournalism to have that in the Washington Post. It was one of the books I wrote that I titled Patience, T.S., Patience Like the Virtue, a psychologist rehabilitation memoir, in which I basically wrote about that experience and what it was like as my own memoir of having gone through some pretty rugged times. Yeah, so it was able to, like the turning point with ROTC, how do I keep teaching in the foreground, but figure out now what are the different ways? And in a wheelchair, 400 days after I was admitted in the emergency room, I was back teaching in the summer program. And I played a round of golf 400 days wearing braces on my legs and got a hole in one.
You know, I'm listening carefully to your story, Tom, and I think Jane's right, obviously, about resilience, but also, you know, related to that is work ethic. Who in the world who is in a hospital for 4 months thinks about, I'm going to start recording? And I know these two stenographers, and I've got daughters who are going to do, you didn't even stop working. You were in a hospital for 4 months. You didn't stop working.
This physiatrist who came in and spoke with me and basically was doing therapy with me, he said, Tom, he said, you've got an illness. He said, my sense of you already from the short time you've been here is you live your life above the neck. And your cognitive function is always, the motor is always running. It never gets turned off. Now, below the neck, you're in really bad shape. So if you were climbing telephone poles, if you were a concert pianist, if you were a golfer, by the way, they're playing the Ryder Cup this week at Bethpage Black, which is the course I grew up on. And when I was in college, I brought the exact same game to the Black course at Bethpage. And I shot a 76 and I shot a 96, and I had exactly the same game. It is that type of a course that you just have to go with the flow and see what happens. But as the physiatrist said to me, he says, so you've got to figure out, he says, I have no doubt you're going to be back teaching. You may need voice-assisted technology, which is in the early days because I lost the capacity to move my lips. I lost the capacity to smile. Nothing was working on the top of my face. But he said, you can talk. You can think. You'll figure it out because you want to be a teacher. So we figured out how to do that. And that became my life from pretty much the year 2000 until, well, it's now, that's 25 years and still, taking a licking, still ticking.
I'm so appreciative of our time together, and I want to be respectful of that. And Jane, I know I've done more of the question asking. I apologize. I should have deferred more. But Jane, I'm going to give you the last word to whatever you want to talk to Tom about or ask him about. And you and Tom can have the last words together.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. I guess, Tom, I'd like you to reflect on what it was like to participate in the Puget Sound conference, particularly because for me, that felt a little bit like a bookend, that something you started and now here's, or maybe an installment would be better. But to see how much had changed, to see some familiar faces, to see some new faces, I'm wondering what was the emotional experience like at Puget Sound? And by the way, I wasn't there. So.
Oh, I remember. I was disappointed by that.
Well,
yeah,
I made the,
but Eric was, yeah.
I made the decision that probably it was time for me to step aside so that younger people could begin to filter in. And I absolutely hated the decision. And so I've retracted that and I've participated in everything since. So that's why I wasn't there.
Yeah.
So what was that experience like for you?
Well, it was very rewarding because we had cultivated very new ground at St. Mary's. There had been basically senior citizen elder men in the undergraduate community that had fashioned prior reports after World War II about undergraduate education. And St. Mary's tried to open that up in terms of the diversity of perspectives, of people's life experience, of institutions. So from 1990 until the year 2008 when we gathered at Puget Sound. Higher education had also moved on. There was a lot of other changes on the horizon, and there were a lot of other institutional pressures that were taking place in terms of the life of a faculty member, the demands of departments, the understandings of disciplinary outcomes and delivery systems. So what was really rewarding for me is we got practical. I felt we got practical enough. I got rewarded by Diane to be in the first group and to be the philosophical group. So that's why we came up with, really innovative interdisciplinary concept, psychological literacy, which embedded then psychology within all of those changes that were taking place in higher ed. But then the other groups really built on what we had started. And yours is a perfect example. The practical, specific, departmental, tangible things to work with, to sink your teeth into, the roadmaps that you and the groups that you have chaired ever since Puget Sound have just been absolutely, what are we up to now? Psych 3.5?
3.0.
Yeah. Whenever I see those coming across, boom, I go in there and I read them.
Yeah.
And I see, you are always very kind in terms of the bibliography says we stand on the shoulders of X, Y, and Z. Okay.
Correct.
St. Mary's, we didn't have many shoulders. I had the historical understanding at that point because that was my shtick, being in overall higher education, liberal arts. But St. Mary's was kind of really plowing up new ground. But Puget Sound also was a gathering, and Diane is just incredible. That's why she became president of the whole APA. But that felt really, we had graduated to a point within undergraduate psychology that we could then get very, very practical in terms of faculty development, departmental development, overall undergraduate education development. It was like, that was able to happen. And if you go through and the players and the programs and the characteristics, where does psychological sciences stand within the overall arts, humanities, and sciences on a university campus? I think, Puget Sound, and especially your very, very pragmatic, historically grounded work has enabled the discipline to do, Jane. So I have two stories. May I add?
Oh, please. Yeah.
Please.
Bad department. One story. I was interviewing to be a chair in trying to leave Virginia. And this is when I took the job at Arizona State. But who's going to not take a job to be Dean of Arts and Sciences and given 50 faculty positions to recruit and say, hey, start a campus? Okay. I interviewed for department chair. Every room I went in, as you go through the typical department chair gauntlet, and you go in here, you go in there. The young faculty were saying, we are so unappreciated. All we're trying to do is write. We're trying to grow our resumes. We're trying to do this. The senior faculty are saying, we got these young people and it's the women are even worse than the men. And all they want to do is write. And we built this department. So back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Last day, first of all, I arrived. Nobody picked me up at the airport. I was put in a motel at the end of a cul-de-sac with no restaurant. No one fed me the first day I was there, waiting to go to the department. Young faculty member picks me up for breakfast the second day. We drive through Hardee's, and he says, hey, by the way, if you want, order the hash browns too. It's okay. I've got the budget. So we went through, got to the department. I did the gauntlet. Next day came back. At the end, there was this final session. And they had advertised, can't wait until see how you answer these questions in the final session. I walked into a classroom. They had the complete chairs all around in a circle with me at the top all by myself. And somebody kicked off, and it was the same cacophony of one person from this group, one person from that group. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So they finished up and they said, well, do you have any impressions? I said, yeah, I do. And then they interrupted me. I paused and they interrupted me and they started to say, no. Like what feedback would you give us? What would you do if we decided we wanted you? In that tone of voice too. I said, well, first, I think as part of my, job offer, I would negotiate with the dean so that we could have a retreat. And we would go away together in a nice place and we'd have an agenda. But the first agenda would be, when a guest comes to town, how do we make them feel welcome? How do we basically take them to dinner? Not think da-da-da. And I basically then went back and by name, I went around the room and said, so when Frank said this is what I heard. And when Jane said that, this is what I heard. And basically, the group dynamic stuff that you do, that we all do in classes. And I actually said, I've been listening and I've been remembering. And I said, so basically, if I were to take the position, we'd come up with and we would fashion a consensus of how we're going to do things together as a group. I left. I went back to the department. The guy who had a reputation for being pretty sleazy in the department shows up and he says, I've been designated as the person to bring you back to the airport. I have an over-the-shoulder bag. I have a suitcase with my attaché in it. He's got a motorcycle parked in front of the department that he's going to bring me back to the airport.
Sorry.
I got back to the airport. I immediately had 2 Jack Daniels. Immediately. And I got on the phone and I called Patty back in Richmond. I said, I know where we're not going. I had not gotten into home to Richmond. Within an hour after landing in Richmond, the dean was on the faculty, was on the phone saying, Tom, I don't know what you did. You were the 4th candidate who came and interviewed here to be chair. This has never happened. I've been the dean for, and he trotted out and he said, as you probably picked up, psychology, is a difficult department to be with. And he said, they voted unanimously within 20 minutes after you left to whatever it took, make sure that you got asked to be the chair of the department. And I said, oh, that's a little surprising. He says, damn straight, it's a little surprising. That's one story. The other story I'd like to share is I was thinking about the group that you were asking this. 2 ideas. Plato used 3 similes to describe a teacher and describe Socrates: gadfly, midwife, and then electric eel. So be unsettling, enable that which is inside of our stoops, the old notion about educare, to bring forth. And then the third is a little bit more, is tricky. You got to know the electric ray metaphor or simile, is to every once in a while, if you can, every class, to stop people in their tracks and say, wow, I need to think about that. And what I try and do in my teaching is to blend that with something that was part of the original research on counter groups done at Stanford. Across all the different theoretical perspectives that the leaders brought to the table, and there were 20 different groups psychoeducational groups, high levels of caring, moderate levels of cognitive stimulation, moderate levels of emotional stimulation, and then consistent technical management and structure. And I kind of go back every time I teach and say, intellectually, have I lived up? Have I tried to really grab Plato's similes and then also treated the environments with those four characteristics so that everybody felt my concern, my care, my listening, my taking seriously what they said. There was some juice in our groups. There's some ideas that they brought with them, and also that they felt safe. We have a syllabus, we have a grading system, we start a class on time, we finish it on time. People can count on something that's predictable, and there's safety in that. It's not so. Those two stories I have in terms of what I have tried to take away from a lifelong learning about what an incredible, wonderful profession we have.
That was absolutely elegant, wasn't it?
It was indeed. The best part of this is when I shut up and listen. And so I just thank you both for your time this morning. And Tom, I'm no steward or representative of psychological science, but I think Jane would join me in thank you for everything that you've done for teachers. You have a legacy that continues to this day, that will continue forever. Thank you. I know that's inadequate, but that's all I've got.
Hear, hear.
Well, teaching of psychology, in particular, Division II, has graced me with just wonderful people to hang out with and to learn from and to co-write, co-think, co-martini with.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.